Hi everyone and welcome back to Hazel's Violin School. In this video I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about where to source your own very first beginner's violin. So stay tuned and let's get into the video. Now, there are four main places where you can source your own very first beginner violin. The first place is online. The second place is a general music store or shop as we call it in the UK, and that's basically a store that sells lots of different instruments, woodwind instruments, string instruments, brass instruments, not just specific to violin. The third place you can source a beginner violin is a string dealer or a specialist violin shop or store. The fourth place is a specialist violin maker who will make you a custom-made violin tailored to you. Now, straight off the bat, I am going to rule out the last option, which is the option of a specialist violin maker, because as a beginner, you're not going to be wanting to spend thousands and thousands of pounds on a custom-made violin. So we're just going to rule that one out for now. So that leaves the remaining three options, which is online, a general music store, or a violin store / string dealership. Now what I mean by that is literally a shop that either specialises in violins or specialises in string instruments as a whole. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of each of these options. So the first one is a general music store. And to be honest, this is probably my least favourite option, if you like. Whilst there's nothing wrong with general music stores, from my experience, generally the instruments can be quite low quality and overpriced. And also into the bargain, very often the staff aren't trained for matters relating to violin specific things or string specific things. So to give you an example, say you have a child and you're wanting to go in and buy them their own first violin. Very often if you go into a general music store, staff won't be trained just in relation to things like violin sizing or if anything goes wrong with the instrument. Now obviously I'm generalising here. Very often you might go into a general music store and you will have someone that's a violinist that's working there and they just so happen to know about the violin, but just as a general rule of thumb, I just tend to find that the staff there aren't really trained just with things relating specifically to string instruments or the violin. And into the bargain, I just often find that the instruments can be quite overpriced and of a lower quality. Now, I'm generalising here, that's just my opinion. I just think that there are better options out there. But if you do have a general music store near you, then by all means go ahead and go to the store and see what you think for yourself. So moving on to our next option, and that's a specific violin store or string store. Now, whilst I'm well aware that many of you will not have one of these locally, where I live, which is near Edinburgh in Scotland, we are quite lucky to have a string store, and there's also one in Glasgow as well. So certainly we're lucky over here, but I'm aware that some of you watching this video will not have that luxury. But very quickly, let's just go into the pros of my favourite option, which would be to purchase your violin from a string dealership or specific violin store. First of all, the staff within these stores are trained with all matters relating to string instruments and the violin. So if you have an issue with an instrument, say a string breaks or a bridge snaps, you will literally be able to go into that store and they'll be able to, fix it there and then, or certainly to take it and fix it and get it back to you. Also, if you have a child and you're not sure what size to get them, the staff there will be trained to, size them, measure them properly, and you can rest assured that you'll be receiving a good quality instrument that's the right size for your child. Very often these stores offer incentives such as rental options, which can be great if you're not ready to make a financial commitment right away. or if you have a child that's growing constantly. So it can be really good just to have the rental option there, so that if your child grows, you can literally just size up really easily without having bought a violin and having to then sell it or to make that financial commitment. Likewise, if you're an adult and you're a beginner, and you don't want to make that financial commitment, a rental option can be good. Very often they offer, upgrade options too. So if you've been playing a violin for a while and you'd like to upgrade to a nicer, newer model, there's certainly very often that option there for you. Now, just a quick word on sizing, as I know that can be quite a confusing topic for many. I will be making a video later on in the series about this, but just as a rule of thumb, if you're an adult, a beginner, very often all you will need is a full-size violin, which is a 4/4 sized violin. For children it's slightly different, as they are always growing, and there are a lot of smaller sizes of violins, and it's actually a really important part of the process to choose an instrument that fits. But as a rule of thumb, you should always size down if you're confused as to whether to go for a smaller instrument or a bigger instrument. Say your child's in the middle, you would always size down. But I will certainly be making a video about sizing later on in the series. Now this leaves the final option, which is buying online. And this is a great option for many. There's certainly nothing wrong with buying a violin online, as long as you know what to look out for. So the first thing that you want to consider is quality. And what I would advise here is just to read as many reviews as you possibly can. So the more good reviews that you can find on this particular violin, the better. As a rule of thumb, you can't go wrong with the makes Medini, Cecilio and Stentor. Now I will link to each of these in the description box to this video. My favourite out of the three is the Stentor 2, because it's a decently made instrument, it's good, it makes a good sound for the money that you spend on it, and it's a pretty solid option. Again, I will link these in the description box. Now, a little word about pricing. My advice would be never to buy a violin that costs less than £100. Now that's roughly $130. Now the reason why I say that is because you really get what you pay for when it comes to violins. I promise. Now, whilst I say £100, give or take £10 here or there, or $10, it's not going to make too much of a difference. But if you're buying an instrument that's about £40, £50, you're not going to get a good quality instrument for that money, I promise you, okay? Now, when it comes to learning the violin, the better quality you can get as a beginner, the better, because you're more likely to stick to your practice, you're more likely to want to play the violin, and very often these models, which are very, very cheaply made, very often things like the tuning pegs, which are these little bits here, very often they can be in the wrong place, the violin can be just not set up properly, the strings might slip, the bridges might snap, and it can just be an all-round really unpleasant experience. So that would be my advice. Never go for a violin less than £100, which is roughly about $130. Now, another thing that you might not know if you're a complete beginner is that if you buy a violin online, first of all, very often the violin will come in a case, which is great, we need that. It will come in a case and it will usually come with a bow, usually some quite inexpensively made rosin for the bow. The violin, you'll usually have those three things, okay? Now what you might not know is that sometimes, in fact most of the time, the violin will not come fully assembled, which means things like the bridge may actually come separately in a different part of the case, so you will need to assemble this by yourself. Now this is where having a string store comes in really handy, because if you're able to take that violin ideally to the string store, they will be able to set this violin up for you properly. So if you can take your violin into a specific string store, they will quite happily set that up for you. although very often the violins do actually come with instructions on how to put the bridge on the violin properly. I will go into this a little bit more later on in the series when I will be talking about violin care and maintenance. I hope you enjoyed this video and I look forward to seeing you in the next.